Imagine a world where we focus on ability and not disability. Imagine a world where we all achieve joyful and productive lives despite physical, mental, psychosocial challenges. Imagine a world where we eliminate the cost of needless disability, both the financial and, most importantly, the human costs. Imagine a world where the focus is care and advocacy and compassion and love and not hate. Do you want to create such a world? Do you? Well, join me. We have a good industry, and there's much that we can do, but we have to go beyond what we have done before. We need to think bigger. We need to have approaches that are upstream. What promotes health? What is health? What defines ability? And how may it be achieved? Why do two people with the same physical problem often have dramatically different outcomes? How do our compensation systems, the stakeholders, and our own actions contribute to needless disability? How are we best able to experience joyful, productive lives? Very importantly, what do we do? What actions should we take as individuals, organizations, and as a society? Have you had similar questions? Are there other core questions you want to add? Well, let's go through and explore these questions. So today, we're going on a journey together. I'd like to explore with you 4 areas. First, what defines health and living able? Second, why do 2 people have quite different outcomes? So we're going to contrast those that are really exceptionally able and those that are needlessly disabled. How does the system contribute to needless disability? And then, most importantly, is what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change our field? And our field is changing, but how are we going to change it further? How are we going to look bigger? How are we going to make the needed changes in our society so that we may all experience joyful and productive lives? Do you want to join me on that journey today?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about health. What is health? How do we define health? Well, if we use the definition by the World Health Organization, it's defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely absence of disease or infirmity. So think that complete physical, mental, and social, being. How many of you in this room achieve the definition? Anybody? Wow. Okay, we have one person here. Come up here and share. That's awesome. Most of us don't have that. It's not just being free of physical disease. It's really being totally, embracing life and living life fully. And when we look at health, one of the challenges we have is often we focus just on the physical, particularly workers' compensation, because we don't want to get into some other areas. But what we've learned is to deal with a person's health, we need to deal with the body, the mind, and the spirit. The body, the physical, the mind, what's going on there, our personality, our psychological structure, and spirit. What is our meaning in life? It's a biopsychosocial function. And that's why we see, we'll explore that with somebody who has an off-plan, maybe a physical injury, unless we understand the whole person, we're not going to be able to get the outcomes that person deserves, that we deserve. And we're going to learn that better outcomes occur when we focus on function, the positive, and not on symptoms. And the importance of having a positive perspective, not a negative perspective. One of the things that I want you to take away with you is often why we have bad outcomes in workers' compensation. And the data is very clear. If I take a condition like carpal tunnel syndrome, having a workers' compensation arena, or take it in another arena, is it has worse outcomes in workers' compensation. because we focus on what's wrong, and we set up a number of other things that are going to drive that process to have poor outcomes. We need to understand things from a biopsychosocial perspective. So let's take the issue of carpal tunnel syndrome. 2 weeks ago, I did a review of a case of Mary. Mary is 60-year-old, works in laundry, had carpal tunnel syndrome. She attributed the work was the cause of her problem because she used her hands. How many of you don't use your hands to work? We all do. And the other information to share is that she was obese and she was diabetic. So the whole focus had been on her carpal tunnel being work-related. In reality, looking at the current data, the current science is how we should assess causation, is she had no occupational risk factors for the development of carpal tunnel syndrome. Rather, she had significant non-occupational risk factors: her age, her gender, her obesity, and her diabetes. So the focus was on the wrong cause. So she was put in an arena where she has to prove that she's ill, that she has a problem. To focus on the negatives, so she's not really going to get well, she's going to have poor outcomes. But beyond that, what happens? Does she focus on controlling her diabetes or her obesity? That doesn't happen because the blame is pushed elsewhere. It also illustrates that many of the problems we see in workers' compensation, we focus on a trigger, but there are actually other factors that are going on. Do you know 80% of healthcare spending is tied to poor lifestyle choices? 80%. And these result in problems, the common problems we see: hypertension, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, many forms of cancer. There are 10 modifiable factors that will prevent 80% of chronic disease. But often we just focus on sort of a trigger because we have a whole premise of what we do in the grand bargain, and we don't focus on these other issues, and we create a negative outcome. So I'm going to share with you some of the principles of healthy living. I'm going to take 2 other examples. I'm going to take one of Jim. Jim is obese. He loves food. It's one thing in life that gives him pleasure. He can eat whatever he wants. He's inactive. He drinks. He smokes. He doesn't go to late. He has restless night. Stressed. Far too long. Actually, I think I saw Jim at the casino last time. And Jim has, would you be surprised to know that Jim's got hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, and lung disease? No. And you've seen Jim's in your life. We then see Mike, and Mike is a real person. Mike is my cycling partner. He's lean, he's got a prudent diet, he's active, occasionally wine. Not wine, wine. Drinking. He sleeps well, he copes well with stress, and he's loved. He's cared for by his family and friends. He's got no chronic problems. Lifestyle really makes a big difference. I think that's one of the emphases we're going to see in medicine is more focus on lifestyle medicine. That there are really some 6 factors that relate to that. But we have to keep this in mind even in workers' compensation. Because if we want to get people well, we need to be aware of that. There's forks. Well, of course. So what we eat, what our diet is, our feet, our physical activity, what we do with our fingers, toxins, the tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. Sleep, what's our quality and quantity of sleep? Sleep is something that we should all cherish. I'm increasingly cherish as I age. Stress, we all have stress, but how do we mitigate stress? And then the 6th core principle of healthy living is, do you know what it is? Any guess?
Love.
It's love. Who said love? Good, Bill. It's the cultivation of meaningful, supportive relationships and strong social bonds. Those are the key things to really tie into living well. Over the years, I've learned that probably the most important distinguishing feature of someone who is needlessly disabled versus another person who does really well and has a great outcome is the issue of resiliency. I could share with you many stories of resiliency. You probably can share with me stories of others who have been resilient. But I'm going to share two with you. One is Lou Darnell. Lou is another cycling partner of mine, a friend of mine, from Hawaii, where I lived for 12 years. It's actually good to be here in Las Vegas because this is the ninth island in Hawaii. Because there's so many Hawaiians, there are 115,000 Hawaiians living here in Las Vegas, wondering where the ocean is. So, Lou was a retired U.S. Army colonel, very active, 6 years older than me, although still now he kicks my butt cycling. He headed up a telecommunications company, and about 6 years ago, he had a heart attack. Top of the stairs, fell down the stairs, injured his shoulder, injured his hip. Much of it was unconscious. Went to the hospital, came home, and he wanted to bike ride. And 2 weeks later, he got a discussion with a cardiologist about the risks versus benefits of him returning to cycling, starting gradually, and was decided that the benefits exceeded the risks. So he started to do that. 2 months later, he joined me on a ride around Oahu in the memory of a person who had been killed by a car. And this was the Zachary Manville ride. And we did that together 145 miles. I asked Lou, and this is in writing Living Able, your story really impressed me. What is your takeaway about these whole issues? And he said, know your goals and priorities and approach them with a positive attitude. Always be resilient. And I saw the same resiliency in working as a mentor to the wounded warriors on the Marine base. Incredible people who had very significant trauma, devastating trauma, and got beyond their PSD or the mild traumatic brain injuries or loss of amputations of limbs and being amputated because they focused on resiliency. And what I learned too is that often in the armed forces, they teach resiliency. Do we teach resiliency in our schools? Do our families teach resiliency? We don't teach resiliency. Injured workers are often not resilient. The ones with delayed, they have not acquired that skill. You know what helps with somebody who has low resiliency, which has been shown to be helpful, is compassion and care and listening. And that's an opportunity for us to perhaps do a little bit better than what we've had before. There's also a relationship between resiliency and gratitude. Interesting. Our brains and nervous system change over the years. And some of the recent data with neuroplasticity has been fascinating. That even as we get older in life, that our brains continue to evolve and to change. Structurally, functionally. And what is fascinating is that certain beliefs and experiences will physically alter our brains. We see that with muscle memory. You're learning a new sport. So you keep on doing it over and over again. So I'm trying to really get into playing tennis. So far, I suck. I wouldn't say not that bad. I'm a strong 2-5. But it's a lot easier than it was before because now things are becoming automatic. Now, so that can be in a positive way, or learning how to play a musical instrument. It also occurs in a negative way. If we focus on pain, then there are changes to what's called a pain matrix that will be altered because of our negative focus. And we'll see those changes on brain SPECT scans. We'll see them on functional MRIs when we focus on pain. So that's where some of the better physicians involved in pain management will not talk about pain. They will talk about function. One of the best things we can do if you've got somebody with pain is when they start talking about pain, don't talk about about their pain. Whether it's somebody you're working with or a family member, talk about function. You keep on focusing on the pain, there are going to be structural changes in the brain. Now those changes can also occur over time. So our brains and nervous system do change. What we're also learning as part of that is our minds have much to do with our health. This is reflected in the area of mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Well, mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment without judgment. For me, with at least what my wife is diagnosed as ADHD, sometimes that's hard because I think about a number of different things. But it's really being present there and not judging. And what has been shown is that there have been scientific studies, there have been systematic use of randomized control studies that show that using mindfulness, there is decreased pain, decreased depression, improved quality of life. It helps with substance abuse and somatization. So just a simple process of meditation. Now, I sometimes wonder, why don't we have commercials that say, ask your doctor if mindfulness is right for you. Wouldn't that be great? Well, probably because it doesn't make any money. We'll talk more about the big pharma later on. How many of you do mindfulness or meditation on a regular basis? Raise your hands. You don't have to be shy. So a handful of you. Do you want to take a minute just to experience that right now? Maybe that will help us focus in terms of what we're going to be doing today in this conference. Okay? How many would like to do that? Okay, I want you to rest in your chair. Okay, put your hands at your side. Okay, just relax. I want you to focus on your breathing. This will be just a minute. I want you to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. I want you to concentrate on your tongue. Just let your tongue be loose. Just experience as you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Tongue is present there. Just relax. Just loose. As you breathe in, breathe out. You may have thoughts. Be aware of the thoughts. Just let the thoughts vanish away. Go away. Focus on the breathing. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Experience the breathing. When you want to, as we return to the room. So we spent less than a minute on that. The room seems a little bit more settled now than it did before. Imagine if we did that with those who are injured ill and taught them simple skills like that, where we would periodically checked in ourselves so we stayed on focus and we weren't so scattered. Would that be helpful? I suspect for our one truly healthy person in the room, that's something that you do on a regular basis. It is? Great. Thank you. I'm glad you do. I, like many of you, I fly a lot. Tomorrow morning when I leave Las Vegas on a United Airlines flight, approximately 200 miles out from here, something phenomenal is going to happen to me. Nobody will know about it on the plane. I will pass my 2 million mile mark with United, of air miles, not dollar miles, miles in a seat, which means I spent my butts in the seat a lot of times. And with that, I meet some fascinating people, some not so fascinating people. If they're not so fascinating, that's what Bose headphones are for. You just smile. And I met a very fascinating person about 5 years ago on West Africa. Wes, very impressive guy, was the CEO of Compassion International. Some of you may be familiar with Compassion International. It's a Christian-based organization that provides support for children in need worldwide. There are sponsors, a modest amount of money is sent monthly, but more importantly, there is, or equally importantly, is correspondence with the sponsored child. And I was sharing with Wes that I was trying to understand why people have delayed recovery, why some people do well. And he said, well, I can share a story with you that I think will answer it. And he shared the story. Do you want me to share that story with you? Well, this is a story about a sponsor. She's a British woman. This is back in the 70s. The middle-aged school teacher, and she was sponsoring a child, a boy in Kenya. A boy that had really some real difficulties with self-esteem. He was trapped in hopelessness. He wrote to her. You see my picture. I'm not very handsome. She wrote back. She said, I find you very handsome. You're a handsome boy. He wrote, I don't have anything in my life. She wrote back, you share with me that you have the home where you live, you have your family, you have friends, you have God's love, you've got my love. He wrote a letter and said, you can see my report card, I'm not very smart. And she wrote back, she said, actually, you've done really well in a number of areas. You're doing fine. You're doing all that you need to be doing. He wrote, I started to run. I like running. And she wrote back, that's great. Run. Be the fastest. You run as fast as you can. You love running. Pursue that running. He wrote back, hey, I'm the fastest in my school. And she wrote, awesome. You are such a wonderful, fast runner. Focus on that. Do what your heart calls you to do. He wrote back, I've been following your guidance and I keep on running and I get faster and faster. And I'm the fastest runner now in my region. And she wrote back, keep on running. And then the correspondence stopped. He didn't respond. And years went by with no letters back from him. And then, one day, there was a knock on the door. She opened the door, and there was a tall, lanky Kenyan who reached out with his hands, holding a silver Olympic medal, and put that around her neck, and said, if you hadn't believed in me, hadn't encouraged me, hadn't cared for me, I would never accomplish this. This is your medal. This is your victory. What she did is she cared, she loved, she expressed compassion, she emphasized what he could do well, and it had a profound impact on his life. We could take that analogy back to what we do with claims. Do we support people? Do we encourage them? Or are we adversarial? Sometimes we do need to be adversarial, but is there a better way of approaching people with compassion? So that story had a very profound meaning for me. And it related to the issue of well-being. Well-being is really developing a state of mind in which we are able to realize our own abilities, cope with the normal stresses, work productively, and make a contribution to our community, to society. And in doing that, we ultimately reduce the costs, the human and financial costs. Or for others of us who use the Bible in terms of a spiritual thing, or just as a great reference book, is we're told, do to others as you would have them do to you. And one of the things that we want to do positively to others is work. I'm appalled by my profession that there are certainly lots of incredible medicine and technologies and approaches, and we have a few providers that perhaps need to be more enlightened. And I think particularly the area to be more enlightened about is the benefits of work. Studies have been so clear that work is healthy, and not working is not healthy. Work defines who we are. It's central to our importance, our self-identity. It's the removing people from work puts them at tremendous risk. In fact, studies have shown that the health risks of removing somebody from work are equal to the health risk of being in some of the most dangerous occupations, like working on an offshore rig in the North Atlantic. Taking somebody out of work is something that has tremendous negative impact on their overall health. So it should be rare that we would ever accept a physician saying, off of work, unless there is a real, profound reason for it. That always reassess whether somebody is able to work or not is looking at the issues of the risk, their capacity, their tolerance, and how can that employer, hopefully a wealthy employer, care for that person. And I find that when we write prescriptions, it's a black box. There's a black box of all the nasty stuff that can happen if you take that medication. I would like to see a black box for when you say no work, because it is associated with severe health consequences. Well, understanding some of the basics there of the health and well-being, I'd like to then look at why we have different outcomes. So let's compare two people. We're going to compare the Brian. Brian is a Marine, like many of the Marines that I saw, and were incredibly awesome. Especially the amputee ball team, who were playing ball far better than I could ever play. In fact, when I did play ball as a youth. I was in Little League. I played left out. But it wasn't left outfield, it was left out. But these were really awesome people. Well, Brian lost both legs as a result of a improvised explosive device. Catastrophic injury. But you would like him. He's cheerful, he's strong, he emphasizes his gratitude for life, he focuses on his strength. He doesn't make excuses, he's fearless, he focuses on the function, he's not involved in litigation, problems are just merely challenges, he's optimistic, he's active, he forgives others, he's resilient, self-responsible, and internal locus of control. Isn't that what we all want to be? You don't have those type of qualities. Well, let's compare it. We talked before about a Jim who had some lifestyle issues. We'll talk about a Jim who has low back pain. And he's the person that you may have seen in some cases of delayed recovery. You probably don't like Jim. And, Jim is not fun to be around. Over the years, I've done the several thousand IMEs, which is a very incredible experience of spending as much time as you want to be with someone and understand their story. But I found out I really didn't like being around people who complained. So I personally, when I stood a lot of consulting in that area, I decided not to be around people that I didn't really enjoy being around. So that was just me. But so you really don't probably like being around Jim. Jim is depressing. He is mad. He is angry. He focuses on his problems. I low back problem. I can't do this and that. He always makes excuses. He's involved in litigation. That's a focus. Working with his attorney will settle. Problems are good. Problems are barriers. He's pessimistic. He's inactive. He's angry. And who's responsible for his low back pain? His employer is, and his doctor is for not fixing him. He is mad at the world. When you look at all the qualities of the people who are really living exceptional lives that are inspirational versus those who have this delayed recovery. And you look at every aspect of it, they're direct opposites. Does that make sense? You know, how we approach life, how we deal with challenges, you know, our strength and resiliency. Do we have gratitude or not gratitude? Do we own the responsibility for our problems, or do we put that on others? They're entirely different. So knowing that, we can then intervene and make some changes. So the question now is, what do we do? The thing is, we have a system. We have workers' compensation and disability systems. And I think the grand bargain from 100 years ago at that time was a grand bargain. It was appropriate to have an exclusive remedy. Anybody around at that time to recall? But, you know, as it has unfolded over the years, I really question whether it still is the grand bargain. Because some of our understanding of health and the issues that drive outcomes and the expansion has been in a way that I think ultimately has been harmful to some who are injured and ill. Think about Jim. Jim has an injury. He enters the workers' compensation system. It's a real complex web. We see that reflected in terms of the various participants in this conference. We see that in the exhibit hall. You think of, you know, Jim, he has an injury, he's going to see a physician, probably see another physician, employer, he's got healthcare providers, the adjusters, attorneys, the hearing officers, drug companies, device manufacturers, bill review companies. There are a whole variety of participants. It's a very complex web. It's like jumping into these waters that, you know, you're trying to navigate your boat around, and there are sharks jumping around everywhere. There's a big storm. You don't even have a GPS. You don't know where you're going. And we let people jump into the water. We don't really move them in a way that they need to be moved. From my perspective, and it took me a while to realize this, because sometimes it takes a while to realize things, is that participants typically define their realities consistent with their belief systems. And we have our own internal belief systems and their incentives. And usually the incentives are financial incentives. And so we have a problem of the beliefs, it's maybe ignorance and incentives. And then we look at the doctors, look at my background, and doctors, what do? We pay them to do things. We pay them to do procedures. We don't pay them to listen or to educate. We have, we'll discuss a big issue with big pharma. We pay doctors to prescribe, and sometimes they will actually dispense, making it much more convenient for the patient. You know, I mean, making it a great new opportunity for profit. What do we do with plaintiff attorneys? Attorneys that are supposed to be representing those who are injured and ill. We incentivize them. The more injured, the more ill, the more disabled, the more money they get. No wonder that they focus on that. So much of what happens, from my perspective, is due to the issue of greed, and it's related to poor system design. So let's go on this journey here. Jim has back pain. He starts his journey by going to the ER. He's given opiates. He's told to see someone else. He's frustrated, and a friend advised him to see a doctor who his attorney had recommended. So he goes and sees Dr. Sam. Well, Dr. Sam forgot in medical school they was told first to no harm. He's rather developed a lucrative practice focusing on workers' compensation and automobile injuries. He advertises. You can see, actually, he's done some billboard ads here. He works in conjunction with other doctors, nurses, chiropractors, physical therapists, psychologists, and does lots of testing. And he sees him, and he says, yeah, you really hurt your back. We're here to care for you, and we'll take you. And that's unfortunate. We see so many people with that employer with that. We're going to do an MRI. The MRI shows degenerative disc disease. Look how bad your back is. You're going to need treatment a long time with us. We're we're going to put you on Soma, which I won't tell you is a worthless drug that I buy for $5 and I sell to you. Have your insurance company pay for $500. We're going to put you on OxyContin because then I can get you back to your drug test and I can bill a lot for that. I'm going to refer you to the chiropractor, Dr. C.E. Forever, and this goes on and on and on. But well, you do need an attorney. We actually know a very good attorney, the Will Settle, Esquire. Refer to that. And so you see that. I mean, it's a composite of that. So what? We shouldn't say that. I think it's a minority of providers, but they cause the majority of the problems. We should have zero tolerance for that type of behavior. That is destroying someone's life. It's creating needless costs, far more than the human cost and the financial cost. So what problems do we see there? First of all, we saw ignoring first do no harm. We saw inappropriate diagnostic testing, inappropriate labeling, saying you have degenerative disc disease. We all have degenerative changes. It's not necessarily a disease. Inappropriate treatment, didn't educate, didn't empower, didn't engage the injured worker. Inappropriate treatments. Of course, Dr. Sam took him out of work. Putting him at an increased risk of that, and it goes on and on and on. So we have the problem with him. The other issue we have is the overall issue with healthcare. We spend in the U.S. over $9,000 per capita for healthcare. Now, we compare that to other countries in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the average is approximately $3,200. We don't have better health outcomes than the other countries have. We don't have better life expectancy. In the U.S., the average life expectancy is 79.3 years. In Australia, it's 82.3 years. Yet they spend less than half of what we spend. We're the only healthy country, a wealthy country, I wish we were a healthy country, but a wealthy country without universal health care insurance coverage. The only one. We're the only one other country offers direct-to-consumer drug advertising. We have the influence of big pharma. Worldwide, $950 billion is spent on pharmaceuticals. Some are needed, a lot of them are inappropriate. We spend $300 billion in the U.S. More people die each year from prescription drugs than they do from car accidents. We get so used to, when you go to your doctor, is what did the doctor prescribe? We get so used to it, it's not getting back to what do we do for our lifestyle, how do we change that? We're looking for drugs. And I think that one area of drugs, I'll just mention briefly, that is no more damning indictment for the profit motive of the U.S. healthcare system than anything else is opiates. And 183,000 deaths from 1999 to 2015. Purdue's revenues for OxyContin, $31 billion. The Sackler family now has a net worth of $14 billion at the expense of 183,000 lives. That's appalling. 8 million of us are on opiates for chronic pain when that's not appropriate. Great marketing, incredible atrocity. We have to really look at the issues of our healthcare system and the influence of big pharma, and that particular problem areas such as the use of drugs. Let's look at some of the other participants briefly. The claims adjuster. Well, back to Jim. Jim, and then there's the Dr. Sam, and we'll get to the attorney later. The Mary, the adjuster, she hates Dr. Sam, because Dr. Sam really causes problems with that. She's really skeptical about Jim, and the employer also doesn't like Jim. He's a bad employee. So she doesn't give Jim the time of day. She's confrontational with him. It's not surprising that Jim gets an attorney. How would that change if she really listened, she empowered, she engaged, she educated, she applied advocacy-oriented claims care? We would have entirely different outcomes. So often in doing IMEs in years past, we find out that people really did not have a good relationship with their claims adjuster. I hate the term adjuster, representative or advocate perhaps is a better one. And we also have the attorney involvement. The litigation is a major driver of chronic pain. It prolongs cases because we give incentives that the worse you are, the more injured, the more ill, the more disabled, the more money is there. And perhaps one profound question we can ask is, in the workers' compensation system, how does one ever get well if you have to focus on what is negative, what the problem is? If you have to keep on proving that you have a problem, it just does not really make sense. We can look at the other stakeholders. We can look at employers, how welcoming they are, whether they really embrace others as co-workers, as part of the family, that they're other associates, how they accommodate to bring people back to work, that healthy companies, we have healthy relationships with their other members of the company. We can look at the issue of judges, the area of IME positions, but I just wanted to share with you some insights of some of the stakeholders. So the question now is, what are we going to do? So we talked about the issues of health and ability. We looked at, contrasted the needlessly disabled versus the exceptional. We looked at the path that someone went through. Did those resonate with your experiences in life? So the question I have for you is, what are we going to do? We need a different approach. We need to think bigger. We need an upstream approach. There is a parable of three friends used in public health to discuss priorities. Imagine you and two friends are walking down to a river. Beautiful scene, swiftly flowing river going down, and then half a mile later is the river cascades over tremendous falls. It's just a gorgeous, sunny, and trees and breeze. It's a beautiful sight. And then you notice that there are children caught in the river. They're sucked up in the river in the middle of it, and they're going down, and they're trapped. And there's a waterfall there that's going to lead to their demise. So what do? Well, you immediately jump in and try to rescue the children. You realize that more children coming. They keep on coming down the river. So you try to rescue what you can, and you bring that child in. You go for another child and bring that child in. Your other friend takes some branches and builds a raft. He goes out and tries to collect more children on the raft and bring them to safety. The two of you are out there doing the best you can to rescue, and you look for your third friend. Your third friend is nowhere to be seen. And then you see that she is upstream. She has gone upstream. And you say, "What are you doing going upstream? They're over here." She said, "I'm going to find out who's throwing the kids in the river and stop it. I'm going to prevent the problem." So back to our arena. Perhaps the first one, rescuing, that could be anyone. It could be a physician, it could be an employer trying to do what you can. Maybe the raft builder is the case manager, trying to coordinate things, get things together, try to do that. But what we really need is we need the upstreamists too. We have to find out, why are people entering our system, and how can we prevent that? We need more upstreamists. The costs are really just too dramatic, the human financial costs, not to prevent this. I don't know the answers. I've been challenged with the questions there. I don't know the answers. I know there are some possible answers. Some may work, others may not. Some are easy to implement. Others are far more difficult to implement. But let me share some with you. And perhaps we could also, if you want to, is get an idea if you think it's... I think we could first look at problems from a larger standpoint, from the upstreamist standpoint. One solution is that we first own the problems, that we recognize the problems and the drivers, and we educate all stakeholders. Everyone who's involved in the system and the public. Good idea? We hold all stakeholders accountable for their actions. That if their actions result in an adverse outcome, they're held accountable for that. The other is shifting our focus from disability to ability, disease to function, the medical model to the biopsychosocial model. So maybe in future years we won't be attending the National Workers' Compensation and Disability Conference, we'll be attending the National Workers Advocate and Ability Conference. Wouldn't that be great? We're going to promote the concept of personal accountability, that we are accountable for our own lives. We're accountable for the decisions that we make. How about a public announcement campaign about work is healthy? That would be refreshing. The next I would love to see, but I wonder if maybe it's not realistic, is I would like to have a ban of advertisements by pharmaceutical companies, device manufacturers, physicians, and attorneys. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah.
We need to restructure workers' compensation. I'm not sure what the structure is. I think we need to provide some alternative systems, perhaps with some of the employers to look at injury benefits within a 24-hour coverage system, because so often it's hard to differentiate the etiology of that, and when we start to really do that, we just set up for failure. I'm not sure how we'll do that. The other, which is controversial, is I shared with you we're the only wealthy country that doesn't have universal health care coverage. We need to achieve that. A single payer system. I'm not sure how we do that. And I'm not sure how we do that at the same time is having people recognize that they are responsible for their lifestyle choices. That first we have to take care of ourselves. That's not just an entitlement, but we need to have a better process than these fragmented components that we have. The administrative costs are about 40% in terms of what happens with our healthcare insurance dollars. It shouldn't be that way. We need to have universal healthcare coverage. How about healthcare? Well, in healthcare we need to change the financial model. We need to pay for outcomes, not procedures, use evidence-based practice guidelines, stop inappropriate testing, inappropriate prescriptions, provide more primary care physicians attuned to health, coordinate involvement of multiple providers, use a biopsychosocial perspective, not a medical perspective, listen to patients, to teach, to use appropriate technologies that empower patient care and provider. And we're seeing that. New delivery systems, including telemedicine. And then areas like causation and apportionment, these medical legal areas, use facts, use current science in making those assessments, not just the opinions of one individual. Because they're an MD, which means mighty deity. It's got to be based on facts and science. We have to consider workability. How do we really define that? How do we, assess impairment and disability? Only doing that if we're qualified. And certainly we've got to work as healthcare providers cooperatively to let go of ego and control. Employers need to provide healthy workplaces. Treat workers fairly. They're members of the family. That they really define who the company is. We've got to focus on health productivity. Staying at work, returning to work, engaging in activities that are positive. And also, when we have an injured person, express concern, care there, from day one, and keep on communicating. Claims. We are seeing changes in the claims area. We need to have an advocacy. We need to be proactive. At the onset is having good communications. And from my perspective, is we need to empower. We need to educate. We need to engage those that are injured and ill. And that was my vision of writing Living Able to. Let's start doing that. Why don't we do that? Why do we just let go and not explain and have people caught up in this confusing maze? I don't know what to do with the attorneys. I think, first of all, with attorneys, we need to, as much as possible, avoid the need for involvement. Look at alternative dispute resolutions. Maybe we can come up with incentives for plaintiff attorneys that they receive more incentives if they get somebody well and back to work, rather than injured and disabled and impaired. And then, how about us? All of us. All of us are going to be injured and ill. 10 steps. 1, we need to assume responsibility for our own lives. We need to take control. We should live in the present. Sometimes letting go of the past and move toward a future that we create. Understand that our beliefs drive our expectations, and change our beliefs if they are not producing the lives that we want. We should reframe injury and illness and aging. That's just part of the human experience. It all happens to us. When we deal with these issues, they're an opportunity for growth. I developed a mechanism now of dealing with challenges, and I've had many personal and business challenges over my life. And rather than getting depressed, when something happens like that, I just say, this is an opportunity for me to become more resilient and to grow. It may seem a little bit strange, but it does work. But we need to, this is just part of life. We need to focus on finding a way to function fully. Not focusing on our symptoms, our pain, our limitations. We're going to be physically active, making wise lifestyle choices, choosing joy and happiness, demanding the involvement of quality healthcare providers and others who embrace our values, and be resilient. And we need to embrace life for all that it offers. We need to stop the needless suffering, the needless disabling that's destroying people's lives, that's costing us too much in terms of society, costing us too much in employers, but most importantly, costing too much for those who are injured or ill and their families. Our focus must be compassion and care, not greed. Are you willing to commit yourselves to the goal that we may all experience joyful and productive lives? Are you willing to take this step? Thank you.